Good afternoon, St. Kitts and Nevis, and welcome back to the afternoon segment of Voices here on Wind FM 98.9. I am your host, Devon Cornelius. We have here in the studio this afternoon two distinguished lawyers. We have Mr. Chesley Hamilton and we have Miss Angelina Gracie Sookoo-Bobb. And we will be having a discussion about death penalties here in the Caribbean, whether it should be abolished or if we should continue with the death penalty. And so this is going to be quite an interesting topic. It is going to be quite an interesting topic, and I could only imagine the number of calls that we will be receiving this afternoon when we do open the phone lines. So we are going to have Miss Sookoo-Bobb give her opening remarks and just say a little bit about herself and what she does.
Thank you very much, Devon. So insofar as it relates to this matter, I am the country representative for a 3-year funded program by the EU to advocate for the abolition of the death penalty in the Caribbean and, in fact, the Greater Caribbean. There are organizations out there who have advocated for the human rights of individuals, and in particular advocating against the death penalty. So there's a death penalty project out of the United Kingdom who teamed up with Greater Caribbean for Life, which is a Caribbean institution of lawyers from as far down as Trinidad all the way up to the Greater Caribbean countries of places like Puerto Rico, the Guyanas, as well as the international organization known as the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty, along with the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, which once was where all attorneys had to go to study, as well as the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Human Rights Association. So in 2018, we were invited to a meeting at the Cave Hill campus to take up the task of advocating for what is one of the most unpopular topics, one of the most sensitive topics that has political, legal, economic, religious views, which, are on the far divide. And I was asked to represent St. Kitts and Nevis in a pro bono capacity, and I took up that mantle. I should say, initially I started off not supporting the death penalty, but having become an attorney at law and having experience in that field, I've now come to believe that the death penalty is not only archaic, but it is something that should be abolished. It is something that, while our colonial masters handed down to us in our constitution, they have abolished it a very long time ago, and they condemn us for maintaining the death penalty. We have it on our books. We don't necessarily enforce it, which is a good thing. But the point is that it is there, and in the Constitution of St. Kitts and Nevis, once you are being tried for the crimes of murder and treason, the death penalty on the book suggests that it's mandatory. The courts have found ways through the advocacy of attorneys such as Mr. Hamilton to not implement it automatically, but it is still what the Constitution requires. And so we really have to address as a human society whether we're going to stop crime or whether we're going to stop lives, and whether state-sanctioned killing by way of execution via the death penalty is really the answer to curbing crimes such as murder, which, although it is described as murder on the books, there are many different circumstances which may lead to someone committing the crime of murder. And there are many cases in which a conviction of murder may actually be against an innocent person or someone who had no idea, because they were part of a joint enterprise, that one of their colleagues had a weapon and was going to use a weapon. So it's a topic that, while it's not popular, it is a topic that is very relevant. And I'm sure, as Mr. Hamilton speaks, you would see in St. Kitts where the possibility of the death penalty sentence being handed down maybe before the end of the year, it is a topical conversation which we should be having. The reason why we're having this discussion in October is because on the 10th of October 2020, we celebrated internationally World Day Against the Death Penalty. It is the 18th year in which it's been celebrated, and each year there is focus on a different aspect of the death penalty. This year it is access to counsel. And so I really, really want to thank my learned senior and colleague, Mr. Chesley Hamilton, who has so willingly volunteered of his precious and expensive time to discuss this matter, particularly in the St. Kitts and Nevis context.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sookoo-Bobb, for those opening remarks. Quite informative, and I'm certain that persons are really listening and persons are tuning in to listen to this discussion that, again, is going to be, in my opinion, a hot discussion, and persons are really looking forward to it. Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Chesley Hamilton, as I would have said earlier, you are a distinguished lawyer. Your opening remarks?
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, Angelina, Gracie, Sookoo-Bobb, my counsel, who I call upon from time to time when I do need things. Sometimes I'm overseas. Sometimes I need something electronically. I could always call her, and I'm gonna burst the bubble. I even called her one time. She was in the movie.
But I answered.
And she answered and sent me, whatever I was trying to find from in the movie. So, I mean, when you have colleagues like this, sometimes you look like you're very efficient and so on, but you don't know. It is the ability to call in favors and call your friends and colleagues at time who can quickly be flexible and help you and sort you out so that you look good when you go before the court. It's not a one-man job by any stretch of the imagination. So when she called and told me she was doing this, I told her, other people have certain matters who she can call on, but she insists that she needed to hear from me on this topic. So I said, well, I just finished arguing a death penalty case in September, early October, and therefore I said we, meaning my other co-counsel, we were in a position to address this matter. Sometimes when matters are before the court, you say that they are sub judice, and therefore you cannot comment on them. But the arguments are over. The submissions have already gone in, and we're just waiting the judge reasoned and timely decision in the matter, given all of his constraints with COVID and resources, etc., and trying to carry on a normal court with the assizes and limitations of the courtrooms and so on. We just await him in terms of when he's ready to set the date and to give his decision in the matter. What I could say to you is that after having piles and piles and, some trees suffering in terms of pages and pages of submissions from the prosecution at the end of the argument, I do believe that the issue of the death penalty was conceded that it was not a fitting and proper in this case, but some other sentence, whether life or an indeterminate sentence in terms of what years and so on should be. Because even when you talk about life, a life sentence in the Federation, are you talking about natural life? Are you talking about, like in Canada, it's 25 years. You could have 25 years mandatory, 25 years without parole, or it is going to be 25 years with a minimum amount of time where you have to spend on parole before you can apply for a review or apply for parole so that you can be let out after 15 years, 18 years, or some other amount. So there are different ways of dealing with this. What I could tell you about a murder case or these cases, capital matters, there's no matter before the court that is more serious. Because a citizen or citizens have lost their lives, and a citizen or citizen's life hangs in the balance in terms of jeopardy. You just look at the sentence, it's life or death. And therefore, there is nothing as serious as that before the court. No matter how much money is at stake, no matter how many lawyers you see, and what big or small letters they have in front or behind their names, there is nothing more serious before our courts and in our justice system and within the democracy that comes before the court than a capital matter. And therefore, you have to thank the jury, the people who serve as jurors when they have to sit on these matters. It's not an easy job. And I must say something about our jury system. I do believe that some aspect of our jury selection needs upgrading. It is outdated. You give a jury 2.5 hours to decide a case that we take to argue, sometimes for months, and sometimes the police investigate for years, and then they bring it to court, and then you ask a jury to decide the decision after hearing the judge sum up maybe sometime for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours to decide a case in 2.5 hours, and then come back out unanimous, and if not, then they can go back and have a 11-1 or 10-2 decision. I don't think that could spell justice in any, pass the smell test of justice in any free and democratic society. And that is the state of affairs we have. We have a state of affairs where that is the case. Another aspect of it is that the prosecution has endless what I call standbys in choosing the jury. They could stand by any amount of jurors, and the defense has 3 challenges. How could that be balanced when it is the accused, the fairness of the accused in terms of a trial? How could that be correct? And in terms of best practices, I could tell you that in other jurisdictions, the prosecution has 12 challenges, and the defense has 12 for certain crimes, like murder and manslaughter and so on. For rape and so on, it might be 9 each, or for larceny, it might be 6 each, right down to something else where it might be 3 each. And I believe that that's a fairer system in terms of how to go about. Our Jury Act needs rewriting.
Yeah.
I've said this many times. In fact, our Jury Act still refers to 9 jurors because the subsections haven't changed from when it used to be 9 jurors. It is still 9 jurors in places like Anguilla. We have moved to 12, but we have not changed the subsections.
Yeah. And that's particularly interesting because we operate...
So what's a safe jury in terms of the numbers in the subsection? Still on the book referring to the 9. So 7 and so on, 7-2 or 7-1, 6-1, 7-2, 6-3 and so on. Those are still within the subsection. I should have walked with it so that I could be specific, but I didn't. But I'm telling you, the Jury Act still refer to, in its subsections, to 9 jurors as opposed to 12, even though the law has changed that there be 12 jurors, and if one gets sick during a murder trial, the trial is aborted. In other trials, no. That is of particular interest in one of the cases that I had done because the judge put in place alternates. Now, there is no law on our book that deal with alternate jurors. It so happened that one of the alternates, not one, but 2 of the alternates sat on the final panel. This case is still outstanding. I wish to see what for the courts will say about what the judge did or didn't do, and therefore, yes, judges have an inherent jurisdiction to manage the rules of their courts, but I want to see how this one goes in spite of what the legislation is and the state of affairs. Okay. So there are a number of issues, and the last issue I want to touch on in my opening remark is the one that Angelina said that this year, 10/10, we celebrate the issue of the death penalty of access to justice. This might alarm you, but there is no real access to justice within our federation to any lawyer when it comes to the death penalty cases. The state lock you up on a suspicion of murder and they put you there. And you are not working. No one is supposed to underwrite and sponsor your defense when you're being tried. That goes against the tenets of justice. And you can say, why? Well, if I commit a crime and I'm going to tell you, listen to me, you're a poor boy, I'm going to pay you to take the rap. So you go there. What are we setting up ourselves for? It is you who's supposed to be able to stand the burden of your fees. Or if the state is threatening to take your life, accusing you of doing something and is threatening to take your life, then the state should see that there are equality of arms. Mm-hmm. Meaning the state has all of its deep pockets and money, then it's supposed to see that if I'm threatening to take a citizen's life, then that citizen is properly represented. Well, represented from when? Represented from the time you reach in the high court and a judge appoint you and say, you can now represent this person at trial, or represent you from the time that you are deemed to be a suspect, because that's where the rights begin to be eroded. If you do not have a lawyer when somebody hold you, when the states hold you and suspect you of murder, to tell you what your rights are, to guide you along, to make sure that irrelevant evidence and false evidence, and be able to take the investigation and the prosecution through its paces. If your rights are not protected at the outset, then you don't have any rights. Don't wait until you reach to a trial when the cards are stacked against you and you have to face a jury that is going to go for 2 hours and come back and say whether you're guilty or not. That is not justice. And what I am basically saying is that the state should start paying from the time the person is suspected. And this is where my problem comes in. You asked me that off air about being paid and so on. This has been the quest, because I'm not arguing for pay for matters like rape and larceny and burglary and any of those things, okay, wounding. I'm arguing over death penalty cases, murder. And some of these cases, when people have sat in jail for years, I have been able to be successful at something called a preliminary inquiry in terms of no case submission before magistrates. Mm-hmm. Matter didn't reach upstairs for the judge to appoint me. And the state is saying, for all of that work, I'm supposed to be paid zero. As one attorney general said to me, Chesley, you are a victim of your success.
I just want to jump in here.
Good.
And because you live this very often, particularly because of the number of charges that we've had in syndicates for murder over the last decade or so, even before the last decade. Yeah. The UN Economic and Social Council have made it very clear to states that the obligation that they have in death penalty cases means that they must provide adequate assistance of counsel at every stage of the proceedings. Amen. Above and beyond the protection afforded in non-capital cases. Wow. Why is that? It's very simple. If you execute the wrong person, you cannot revive him.
You cannot correct it. It's something you cannot correct it. You cannot redo it.
Yes. And it's not far removed from St. Kitts. I started off by saying when I first came here, when I first became an attorney at law, my view changed. And that was because I had the privilege as a very young lawyer back then to be a part of one of the infamous cases, death penalty cases in St. Kitts from a constitutional perspective. And because of the death penalty project, we were able to hire psychologists. We were able to hire Queen's Counsel out of the UK. And one of the 4 individuals who were, when I met them, they were all dressed in white because they are condemned. So you're treated very differently.
Certainly.
When you're in the prison. And this particular gentleman, he, at the Court of Appeal level, after they were already read their warrants to be executed and the human rights, we step in because there are 2 phases to these cases. You have criminal lawyers who do their best at the pre-conviction and sentencing stage, and then you would have the human rights lawyers take over to see whether from a constitutional perspective there is anything that could be done. Because of the investment made by persons from international organizations, this particular then convict was set free because the psychological report revealed that he had not matured over the age of 7. So, yes, he was with his older brothers. So he looks like he, in terms of, if we were to go by nominal years, he would have been over the age of 21. But in terms of his legal age, with this diagnosis, he could not have matured over the age of 7. That's where he stopped maturing. So for legally, he's still a child.
Right.
But he comes from the working class and the poor class. And as a result of that, no one would have taken the necessary steps to have these things confirmed legally. And his brother or friend decided, let's go on a drive. And he went on this drive. The end result is it ended up in at that time, one of the most outrageous murders in St. Kitts in the 2000s. And he was convicted that he didn't really understand what was going on. At the PI stage, they had no attorneys present. There were a few ambitious lawyers who were very young at that stage, under the age of 5 years call, who attempted to represent some of them. And 2 missteps happened because of inexperience. An alibi testimony was not put forward at the PI stage. Now, what is the PI stage? Normally, when you're facing these type of what we call capital crime, you must first go before a magistrate where the prosecution would have to argue that there's at face value a reasonable amount of evidence to suggest that John Doe is the person who committed this crime or crimes. And if the accused is not represented at the most, well, of course, the most critical is when they're arrested and their right to remain silent and etc., or possible convictions, admissions, which the criminal attorneys can get thrown out depending on the nature of it. But because of the lack of the ability to put in an alibi evidence at the magistrate's level, you're shut out at high court. And because the whether or not this particular gentleman could even be prosecuted because he's a child. I mean, if he looked like a child at 7, a 7-year-old child, physically, I'm sure the society and the prosecution would have had a completely different outlook, because in law you can't really charge someone under the age of 7. But he did not have that resources. And it's only at the stage of just before they were executed, warrants already read, international human rights organizations stepped in, and his conviction was completely quashed. So we tend to, as a society, and particularly politicians and lawmakers, we tend to hold on to the death penalty without really understanding or appreciating the faces behind these matters. And we're not saying that the victims of the original offense are not important. We're not saying that at all. But we are no longer living in a society where it's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And there are a lot of Christians back who adhere to the death penalty, even though one of the 10 commandments is that thou shalt not kill. So the question is, does state-sanctioned killing fall within that 10 commandment? Because I don't recall there being a caveat or a footnote. So it's really important to appreciate the importance that persons like Chesley play in terms of ensuring that lives aren't lost, because the possibility of that happening is very, very real.
We have what I call a conundrum in our society, Judeo-Christian society, in that we talk about the death penalty, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and so on. And then we said, well, what was Jesus guilty of? And he said he wasn't guilty of anything, but he was put to be hung. And then you just try and justify it. Oh, he came to die. you know.
But you can go further. You can say he came to die for everyone's sin, including murderers.
Right. You understand? But so I'm just trying to tell people, listen, step back. Step back. Do not take these things like it is just a piece of what you need to read. Step back and look at it. What sort of society do you want to live in when all you want is to exact the pound of flesh, and sometimes you don't get it right? And if you don't get it right, the state cannot correct it.
Right.
You cannot reverse it. But there's other ways of having justice. You could have a life sentence. You could have put a person in prison for a number of years where they're able to rehabilitate. And therefore, we have lost one citizen, but at least we have redeemed another one. And therefore, that is a more compassionate, democratic society in which you may want to live, to have less crime, to have less people like this, and to be able to have somebody be exalted, an exaltation to say, he was once bad, but he found salvation. And he has found salvation, and now he's good. Whether that is Saul on the road to Damascus who became Paul, or whoever. This is what you want, and that is the better message for the Judeo-Christian society than always be thinking about punishment and exacting the pound of flesh, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
I should say the Roman Catholics.
That is what I want.
Yeah, I should say the Roman Catholic Association, particularly in the Caribbean, I believe the head is located in Trinidad, have come out in support of the abolition of the death penalty. And so it's very important that we move away from just having views to having real answers to real problems.
Anyone who looked at lynching, who look at cross burning for the KKK, who look at all of these things, who look at the fact that, these were things that were done to manage society and manage plantation. You hang somebody from a tree and you left them there so that everybody can see that if you run away as a slave or if you try to revolt against the oppressor or the master, this is your fate and this is what will become of you. Should begin to understand that there is more than just a crime behind this. There is a whole societal impact on a community, and we should start to begin to analyze what sort of society we need to live in. And that's the moral question and the moral argument. But we will come back to the legal aspect of things. And when you come back to the legal aspect of things, the death penalty is reserved for something which there is a principle now we call the worst of the worst cases. Right. Mm-hmm. And the worst of the worst cases, or the rarest of the rare, has certain factors built into it, which once you go through them and start ticking them off to see if they meet those kind of criteria, you begin to understand what the court is looking for when it tried to pass a death penalty on somebody and said, this is the most heinous of crime and you don't deserve to be still being among us because you are a danger to the society to which you may want to return to. And therefore, the society can only rid itself of you by simply saying, you deserve. This was one of the rarest of the rarest thing. And your mind is, I don't want to use the word incapable of reform, but you are not deserving of another chance to exact your kind of evil on this society.
Right.
And when that is the case, then the death penalty should and can be imposed.
But just before you go to that, there's
Yes.
one thing I wanted to add because it really resonates locally. Many years ago, Bertel Fox, who is Katishan, placed St. Kitts on the map because he was a phenomenal boxer.
No, heavyweight.
Heavyweight
okay.
lifter, yes.
Yes.
And then
and bodybuilder.
And then he, there was an incident which happened in which he was convicted of 2 counts of murder.
Yes.
And he was again close to being executed by hanging. In the same death penalty stepped in. And his case now is the case that all lawyers use. We learned it at school in year 1, and it's the case that really criminal lawyers would use in death penalty cases.
Diminishing
And
return.
he is in the prisons on Keon Street. And from all the reports that will come back, they would tell you that when you see Mr. Fox, you would never, ever think that this gentleman could have committed what would have at that point be considered by society as the worst of the worst. So rehabilitation is not just something fictitious that we're speaking about. There are persons in St. Kitts prison right now who have been rehabilitated.
But thank you so much, Angelina and Mr. Hamilton. But one question I always wanted to ask was, if you kill someone, don't you deserve to die too? I was doing some research last night, and according to a report published by the Trinidad Express, it says the execution of a person for killing another person is an act of revenge and not justice. What do you have to say about that, Angelina?
Well, I'll answer that 2 ways. The first is, kill someone, what was the circumstances surrounding that killing? If you were driving a motor vehicle and a centipede ran up your foot and bit you and you came off the X or whatever and you happened to bang someone on the side of the street, you had no intention of doing that. So it depends on the circumstances. Secondly, if this person deserves to die, whatever the basis that is, then the person that executed the hanging should also die because he's killing someone as well. So we have to be very, very careful when we make carte blanche statements and hold to opinions without understanding context.
Right.
And let me amplify that. The so-called hangman goes to jail for an hour, 24 hours at most, because he has committed a crime sanctioned by the state. You know, the Constitution doesn't say that you should not kill, you know. It should not. It says you should not kill unless due process of law is followed. You understand? So the state has reserved for itself the right to kill. You understand? If you are a soldier acting on behalf of the state, yes, you're going to say, in times of war, do you have the right to kill? Yeah, there are times when the state said it has the right to kill. And therefore, you're going to say, oh, yeah, in that case, it's okay. You just shut your eyes and your brain, turn it off, and you accept, yeah, because the moral part of it goes through the door, because you have been taught that these are justifications. So it's not a moral argument, is that if you kill, you shall be killed, or your life is over. So it's not that. So what kind of constructs do you want to have within a free and democratic society, in a reasonable society? What are the goals of the society? Is rehabilitation possible? Let me tell you something about some people who have been convicted for capital offenses within 1840. I have a gentleman who is going to be out next year who has 20 subjects. And Antoine Thompson, 20 subjects. He had none when he went in.
Yeah.
None. Zero. Zip. He is an associate degree candidate, and he wants to continue to do more. These guys are teaching. I have another one with somewhere in the teen. The last time I checked, he had 15. He teaches maths and physics in the prison. Okay, this is not Moses Gardner. This is
Louise.
This is another one from St. Paul's, one of the youngest one that got sentenced among them, and I'm forgetting his name at the moment. But I'm just letting you know, these are the quality and the caliber of students that we have.
There's Patrice Matthew.
You
Very
know,
good one as well.
we have these guys. So therefore, good rehabilitative work is being done within the walls of the prison. And if we can rehabilitate and reform people and have them come out to contribute to society, this is what you want.
Yeah.
And therefore, that is the sort of society, the society the measure of a good society is not the extent of its barbarism, but how it treats the worst and the most vulnerable among us. And it's the care and compassion and humanitarianism ness that society can demonstrate for its most vulnerable citizens, shows the compassion and the spirit and the goodness of any society. That is what demonstrates it, not the barbarism.
Right, Mr. Hamilton. But something I wanted to get to, we're talking about the death penalty. Don't you think that the idea of imposing a punishment on the same type of crime is absurd? Do you have any comments on that? Because, I mean, if you kill somebody, do you think the punishment should be to kill that person? If you rape someone, do you think the punishment should be for them to be raped? And so, what justice do you really get from that? Any comments?
The youngster whose name I just forgot was Glenroy Smith. No, in fact, even if you go back, and I tend to go back to the Bible many times, you know, if you steal a sheep sometimes, I think there's one passage of scripture say if a person stole one sheep, he must pay you back in three or four times the amount. And there are things like that when it comes to goods. But when it comes to crimes against the person, crimes against the person, you know, one of the things I sometimes tell the jury, you wouldn't know this from looking at it, but there was a time when rape was a property crime. You know?
Yeah, because
it was a property time because
because
women were property.
Yeah, we were property.
The property of men. So when you go and you defile a woman, you were stealing and devaluing that man or the father or the son's property. You're taking her virtue. And therefore, you had to compensate him. There was something in back then called rape and capture. You know, Mr. Cornelius, you have 3 beautiful daughters and you have acres of land and you had no sons, and I wanted to inherit your inheritance, you know, so what I'll do, I will rape and capture one of your daughter, and you will say to me, boy, you have now devalued my daughter, she's no longer virtuous, you have to marry her. Well, when I marry your daughter, I now become the heir to your fortune.
Just want to say it's not just back then, it's still going on.
That is what was happening.
It's still going on in certain countries.
Right. So this is the sort of thing, and therefore we had to move rape from a property crime to a crime against the person, which is the woman. So therefore, that is where the state comes in now and say, well, for doing this, there is a penalty. I'm just showing you how we have evolved.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm showing you how things have evolved. So therefore, the whole discussion about where do we go with quote-unquote homicides, murder. Now, dangerous driving causing death. Very few people go to prison for dangerous driving causing death in St. Kitts. In some other countries, you get jail time. In some places, you get jail time because that vehicle, it is just precedent, you know. It has always been that sort of a way. I mean, who had cars? Who had cars? So who were more likely to be dangerously driving causing death? The captains of industry. So that's how the law has been affected.
Yeah, and who was walking on the street.
But, you know, just before
who killed with knives and guns?
Yeah.
You know, you understand? Or by fighting. So they were deserving of a certain penalty, but not those who drove a 5-ton weapon and kill you because maybe they had a little bit more to drink or something. No, I'm just showing you how things have evolved.
Yeah.
And we have kept that. So therefore, if more often than not, if you plead guilty for dangerous driving causing death, you did not end up with, especially if compensation is part of that package and so on, you did not end up with spending time in prison, never mind anything or the death penalty. However, you get in a fight and hit him on a box and he fall down, hit his head, no?
Right. But, as I was saying, just before we open the phone lines to take some calls from the many callers who are calling,
Oh my.
I just wanted to ask, what we're talking about the death penalty, abolishing death penalty. What if the public opinion is in favor of having the death penalty continued?
So I'm happy you mentioned that because one of the things that my organization did last year, December and January this year, we did a qualitative interview with over 100 stakeholders in the 6 Caribbean countries in which Eastern Caribbean countries we represent. And you would find that when you ask the question in a very blank way, do you support the death penalty? Everyone would say yes. But when you start asking differently, do you support the death penalty in a particular situation? For example, you come home from work one day, let's say you're a single mother and you have a young daughter under the age of 5, and you picked up a boyfriend who's not her father. You come home from work, they were both at home, and you find him doing the worst of the worst to your 5-year-old daughter. And you snap and you end up taking his life. Is that a situation in which you believe that the mother should face death by hanging? And the answers change dramatically. And that's not far removed because child molestation is also something which unfortunately happens. Right. So public opinion, as we say, and that's why we're here to try and really educate and inform not just the society, but the parliamentarians, that we have to start ensuring that when we use our power, whether it is in our opinion, whether it is in our vote, whether it is in the laws that we pass, that we truly understand what we are doing.
Right. But I also wanted to ask you, does the abolition of the death penalty conflict with religious laws and beliefs?
In what way? Which religious law? Which religious belief?
Well, you have, those persons, particularly in the Caribbean, Christians, they don't believe that the death penalty should be something that the state should, continue.
Let me jump right in here, okay? Because I have some friends who believe in, one of them specifically would want to say, well, listen to me, they want a fire over at 1840, all of them should just burn, okay? And when I have in this discussion, I mention, but how many people in St. Kitts have had an abortion? And they stop and they say, well, abortion is not a crime. Abortion is not killing. But abortion is still on the books as a crime in St. Kitts. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yeah.
It's
and many
still
people don't know
a
that.
crime in St. Kitts. But nobody get prosecuted for it. Let me say it again.
And why is that
no one get prosecuted for it. Not that I want anybody to be prosecuted for it. Okay, because I am pro-choice.
Yes,
I would want you to know that.
Yes.
When it comes to the right of a woman, I believe that a woman should have the right to choose these sort of things. And I do believe that I am pro-choice when it comes to women's rights.
Yeah.
So
Amen
I am not in support. I am not in support of us starting to prosecute. But I just want to show you the hypocrisy that something like that is on the books. It's okay. Nobody look another way. But the other offenses, and I used to even come down to the issue of marijuana. Why is marijuana a crime that we are giving our young people all of these criminal offenses for? Making them drug dealers, drug users, all sort of things. And people in the same position who are making millions and billions on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the Nasdaq and other places trading in so-called health stocks.
Yes.
You understand? Could come down here and invest their money, and they are treated as proper captains of industry and businessmen, while our young people are ending up with criminal records. For non-violent offenses, can't get visas, can't do nothing, can't travel, can't do anything. No reciprocity in terms of these things. So I'm just showing you that there is a dilemma, there is duplicity, there is hypocrisy when we come to these things. And what we are doing here is part of what I call a universal conversation, the universal debate. And when we continue to debate and educate, sooner or later, the society will evolve. Mm-hmm. Change is not overnight. Change is not drastic. But if you continue to, it's going to inform itself with examples. Yeah. And people will definitely come around, because I do believe that most people have that thing called common sense, and they are reasonable people.
Yeah. But the unfortunate thing is that we find the cornerstone of society, the family unit, is almost disappearing. We find that sometimes a child is a product of its community, of its society. And many times, particularly our young black men, are sort of marginalized, left to their own. Sometimes you end up in the wrong crowd. Why isn't society as passionate about saving that young man before he goes down the inevitable path? But when he gets there, without proper societal assistance, you want to take his life. What role do you play in that? So, Chesley's saying it's hypocrisy. I'm trying to be a little bit more charitable. I'm a little bit more charitable than that. But we have to be very careful on where we're placing our energies, where we're placing our focus, because children are going to be our future generations. A lot of our black men, when I came here and my first visit to the prisons, and now I represent some of those young men, most of whom were on death penalty convictions and have now been converted to life. And when I see them, there are in particular few that I always say to them, I really wish that you would be able to go out there and speak to young men to show them that this gang life isn't all that it's beefed up to be, and to help change. And they actually know a lot more about criminal law than I would ever know. They're very intelligent, but they did not have the right structures in place to ensure that that intelligence that they have was used for good. But now we want to just blow up 1840. There are criminals all over, not just in 1840. Mm-hmm. So let's be slow on that.
Right. But just before you continue, we're just going to open the phone lines and we're going to take some calls, asking the callers to be as short and concise. Good afternoon, caller. You're on Voices.
Good afternoon. You can find something to justify just about anything. And though the arguments against the death penalty are sound and reasonable, aren't there any absolutes? And some crimes so heinous that they deserve the ultimate penalty, like terrorism and war crimes? And if someone destroys someone's life by taking away his livelihood, for instance, doesn't justice require that the perpetrators suffer the same fate? That's my question.
Thank you, caller.
I will put back a question in answering you. Let's take war crimes, and many times that meets the threshold of the worst of the worst. But I'll show you this now. You would say that Saddam was killing his people, the Kurds. He used chemical weapons and so on. So Saddam deserved to die. And then when the truth comes out that the intelligence that they went to war on Saddam was faulty and it wasn't, should there be a correction someplace? That's all I'm going to ask you. That is the problem. The problem is who is passing the sentence, who is wielding the justice, because at the end of the day, you cannot correct the mistake. And if Saddam was given life imprisonment or some other thing, and you could still be able to get more truths. That's what I'm going to put it as. You could go and talk and say, well, did you do this? Did you do this? Do you want a truth and reconciliation sort of thing so that we can get to the bottom of all of these things so we can have closure to these things? Society would have been better served than to hear now that Bush, Tony Blair, and all of these guys went to war on false intelligence. How do you feel? How do I feel to know that I was part of a democracy or part of a society or coalition that says, yes, let's go get him, when it wasn't based on correct information? Yeah. That is the fear. That is what we're talking about. The rush to judgment when everything is in the mix, and we want to exact that pound of flesh. I'm not trying to say that Saddam was a good man. I'm not trying to say, but even in the Vatican, when they are arguing for sainthood, there is somebody arguing against it called a devil's advocate. And I'm just simply showing you that if you are in that society, you will want to have a measured approach to the ultimate. No one died and made me God. And therefore, I know that, so therefore, I don't want to ever play God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's very important. There's no such thing as an absolute. There's no such thing as an absolute. And who defines justice? How are we sure that the person saying justice is that if you're convicted of murder, we're going to use that because it's very important. If you're convicted of murder, whether rightly or wrongly so, that you should be executed, however, whether it's by hanging or otherwise. We have to be very, very careful. When you live in small societies where the big man, I will just refer to that because I don't want people to think politically anything's been insinuated. When you live in a small society where the big man can have a far reach over police, where you can have corrupt police officers, when you can persecute your political opponents and accuse them of murder when it is not true, and then you, as the state, decides that you are going to execute them by hanging. We have to be very, very careful what we say is justice and absolute.
With that kind of a power, you do not want it, because the executive, which is the executive, means the cabinet, means the police, means the state apparatus, can accuse you of any offense, charge you, and then they use the judiciary, and you say, well, the judges are independent and they're not influenced by anyone. But judges don't find you guilty or not guilty. For these things. It's a jury. So therefore, the same people in the society that are beholden to the powers that be, they are the ones now who are to pass judgment. Who choose the jurors? They come from the voters list. you understand? I'm just simply telling you how it's a compounding thing that can easily close in on someone, and sometimes all that stands between the state and all of its resources, when it is pointing against you falsely,
unpaid lawyer.
Is
unpaid lawyer.
You want to put it that way? It's even worse than an unpaid lawyer, because if an unpaid lawyer has resources, that unpaid lawyer could stand, but sometimes you can't even get, you can't even say you want an alternative view. You can't get another psychologist. You can't get another psychiatrist. You can't get another forensic a person. You can't get another ballistic opinion. Nothing is paid for, so that you could say, listen to me, they say this, but we are saying this. I won a case a day in court simply because the Crown abandoned one of its doctors, and I asked permission to go and speak to that doctor. So I went to the doctor, Dr. C. Haley, and I said, Dr. C. Haley gave me literally a crash course for 2.5 hours in his office one night around 9 o'clock. So about 11:30.
Yeah.
And I started to talk about subterranean injury and all these kind of things in terms of the brain and what is a slow bleed and a quick bleed and all this kind of thing. So that when he went to understand, I could sound half intelligent, asking him some questions. And when Dr. C. Haley finished with the jury, yes, there was a pathologist who said certain things, but the pathologist did not have the charts when he did the charts that Dr. C. Haley had. So Dr. C. Haley had primary information that when the pathologist came months after and did the autopsy and see these things, he did not know from when they were. And therefore, it is that saved that gentleman's life.
Yeah. But the other
And I'm just showing you, just being able to say, can I go and speak to a witness who was at all times the Crown witness? The doctor who works for the Crown because works at the hospital and so on. I have no access to that. I could ask for disclosure, but I can't go and interfere with the Crown's witness. I can't go and talk to them. But if I even get a little warrant, a little stipend, I could say, listen to me, I could hire my own expert to look at the same data and bring a case and put on a case that it could show an alternative view, and therefore you could have some balance and a fair trial. Not even that is afforded anybody.
Yeah. I think you cannot lose focus of what is the purpose of a sentence. You can't lose focus. We are not saying, at my organization and me in particular, I'm not saying that crimes should not be punished. But we have to be careful, as Chesley said, none of us are God. We have given life to no one. There are some of us who birthed life, but we have given life to no one. So when you pass a sentence, the focus should be on preventing that individual or that particular type of matter from happening again by that person, or to be a deterrent and to ensure rehabilitation. And more often than not, there are alternatives to taking someone's life that can do all of those things.
Wow. At this time, we are going to take some more calls. Do we have any calls? We have a caller. Good afternoon, caller. You're on Voices.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Cornelius, good afternoon to the lawyers. Good afternoon, Chesley.
Good afternoon. How are you? How's the sight?
Well, right now I have vision, eh?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
I have lost my sight and I have vision.
Oh, yes. You walk not by not by
you
sight, but by
sight,
faith.
you see vision. You see, look how you get some vision to go ask questions.
Lord of mercy.
It doesn't take sight to see, you know.
Well, I mean, you're getting younger. I thought it says that old men dream dreams, but young men see vision and prophesy it. So it means that you're getting younger.
So what are you doing for yourself? You see the vision yet?
I see.
No, well, I don't really support the death penalty. I did prison ministry
Okay.
for 16 years.
Wow.
Going to the females and, of course, going to the men. And I have seen some persons who are, well, generally the women are usually charged with manslaughter.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I noticed, the women, because I've met 3 or 4 women who had killed their mate.
Yes.
And were charged with manslaughter. And sometimes when they tell you the reason, I might have killed the man too.
Oh, wow.
No, I mean, being honest, because it's usually domestic abuse, Now, what alternatives do you give that would quench the thirst for revenge? Because most people see that as, well, you kill my brother and you get killed, that's the end of the matter. Now, when they just go into prison, the families who were affected feel a certain kind of a way. How do you get them to get over the desire for revenge? Have you thought about it?
I understand.
Right.
It is not easy. No one here is trying to say it is easy. And no one can tell you the pain that you feel for your loss. Nobody can quantify it. Nobody can measure it. Some people live with it every day. Every day, they're crying. Every day, tears are coming.
Yeah, and it was
closure. Closure is not
you said
easy.
that you have some rehabilitation, right?
But yes,
but when they come back out family still looking at them for revenge.
Right, but I'm going to tell you something. In part of the new justice projects in Canada, for instance, among Native people, they now have something, and it's almost like a peace circle where the elders in the society bring the offender and the family with the loss together. And many times those sort of things bring closure. No, anybody can embark upon this.
Rwanda,
Pardon?
when they had the genocide in Rwanda,
Yes.
after that, they did some like it.
Right.
They were able to confront
and there
the
are people, there are psychologists and so on, who have expertise in these areas, who have done many studies and so on, who knows what to do to bridge these
But
gaps.
that should be written in. That should be written into the law or whatever, because you can't just have people go in, because you have people out there, oh, well, even now, I could go jail. You know, some people say that. I don't care if I this and that.
It is
I could
one
go
of the
jail
things that I
anytime.
call for in our society, even with the peace that is going on. I keep telling the government that we need a Truth and Reconciliation committee.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Commission, because yes, the youngsters now have had a truce. But what do we do to maintain that truce? And what do we do to bring closure to those people who lost loved ones? And until you get what I call a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to deal with it, there's going to be this tension under the surface by, me not care what you do now, me not care where you be now, but because I lost my brother, I lost my family, I lost whoever. And the people who had their loss, who has not had anything in terms of any compensation, any reward, and therefore these are the tensions that are just beneath the surface. So I do believe that we have to look
sometimes the young man,
seriously at Truth and Reconciliation.
You know,
Ms. Henry,
some
just keep
parents
it short.
demand revenge. They like the Asian, the karate. Somebody got to revenge somebody.
Yeah. Well,
But it is a ticklish thing, you know.
yeah, but it
You know, it isn't just to say, oh, well, don't hang them. Then
No,
what do
well,
you do?
We're not saying that at all, but it is ticklish.
What are you
but
saying?
It is ticklish, but at the end of the day, it being ticklish is not sufficient.
Yeah, but you must,
let
when
me
you come in,
finish,
you
let
must
me
bring an
finish.
alternative.
Yes, well, we were speaking of alternatives, so let me finish. One of the things that we have recognized, and there's actually one of the groups, and it's a group out of Trinidad where there are numerous murders called Victims for Life. So there are a number of victims who do not actually believe that the person should be executed or given the death penalty sentence. Secondly, whoever believes that going to jail is just a walk in the park, you are wrongly mistaken. Because when you go in there, I can tell you, it's not just being in jail. There's hard labor. Most of these young men have rehabilitated. Most of these young men are doing research all hours of the night, writing long papers because they're in there and they don't want to be in there because it's not a bed of roses. So what you need to do is we need to look, and this is why during sentencing, there is an opportunity for a lot of factors to be considered, including from the victims. Different persons are allowed to speak on the issue before sentencing, so that when you place a sentence, whether it is life with or without hard labor, whether it is a term sentence, whatever that sentence is, that it ensures that it does what it is supposed to do, which is to prevent the person from doing a reoccurring crime, to provide some level of compensation in some form, or to appease the victim or their family. But at the end of the day, a murder, what has happened by murdering someone else, is not going to bring back the initial person who died. All it is doing is creating more victims, because now you have another family who has lost someone. So it's something that we keep advocating has to be done on an individual basis. There should not be a carte blanche law or opinion passed saying, you killed someone, we need revenge. Vengeance belongs unto God. Let's leave it there.
Yes, right. Well, we are running out of time. So unfortunate. So I'll just have both of you give your closing remarks, and I'm hoping that we will be able to continue this discussion sometime next week, if
Next
you
week.
are available. Mr. Hamilton,
It's
your
Scotch
closing,
repeal,
your
isn't
closing
it?
remarks.
Scotch repeal.
I just want to thank you, and I hope that I was able to add something to the discourse out there on the death penalty and these matters that are before the courts. You did ask me about access to justice, and I'm serious. When it comes to access to justice, the state cannot attempt to take someone's life and do not want to have what I call the balancing of arms. And that right should begin when the person first becomes a suspect, not when the person is ready for trial, for some judge and the judiciary to appoint somebody, and then the executive to say, well, we didn't appoint you, we didn't hire you, so why should we pay you? I am basically saying that that cannot be what we want in a democratic society. In a free and democratic society, we should say that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And we should want nothing but a just society, not just a society.
Oh,
Thank you
that's
so much,
lovely.
Mr. Hamilton.
I like that.
Miss Angelina?
I really want to thank WinFM for affording us this opportunity to really get into a very sensitive topic, but a very important topic for us as a society. And as I said, I really want to thank you, Chesley, for coming here and really bringing to light what is going on in terms of the local context, that access to justice, access to counsel, and not just counsel, but competent counsel with the proper resources to advocate is very, very important. We are not trying to have persons go free for committing crimes. We are saying that crimes should be punished, not lives lost. And so I really would like to welcome everyone to really think about it and to really start holding the powers that be to real issues. Let's start legislating, let's start amending the Constitution to ensure that we are protecting lives, that we are punishing crime, and as a society, our laws reflect that we are now mature, we are grown, and while we will continue to punish those that have done wrong, we will no longer be in a barbaric state.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Miss Angelina, and thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for weighing in on this very interesting topic. Much debate has been had on death penalty, and you have those persons who are for it, and you have those persons who are absolutely 100% against it. And so I think discussions like these are very, very important, and it is something that we would want to have going forward. So again, I trust that maybe sometime next week we'll be able to have part 2, because I don't feel that we were able to touch on everything that we wanted to touch on today. But nevertheless, it was indeed an honor and a privilege to have both of you here in the studios of WinFM 98.9. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to today's edition, Thursday, October 22nd, of Voices here on 1FM 98.9. I was your host, Devon Cornelius, and we were joined by Miss Angelina Gracie Sookoo-Bobb and Mr. Chesley Hamilton. As I would have said before, 2 distinguished lawyers. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you.
We're different. We're